I did not leave Brett Maddox because he loved another woman. I left because he asked me to apologize to her while his mother watched from the head of the table and his father stared at his plate. Isla Merritt stood by the dining room window with white wine, embarrassed in that careful way people use when embarrassment protects them. Celeste Maddox kept smiling, soft and polished, like the room had arranged itself around the lesson I was supposed to learn. It was a family dinner in Sacramento, the kind Celeste called casual after setting out linen napkins, heavy, silver, and flowers nobody was allowed to touch. Brett had barely spoken to me all night, but every time Isla shifted in her chair, his eyes found her before mine did. Then Celeste lifted her glass and praised Isla as a woman who knew how to make a man feel heard, and Brett looked down at his napkin instead of looking at his wife. That small movement told me more than any confession could have. I asked him if there was a reason his mother was toasting the woman he had been staying late with after closing. The room tightened. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for a fork near Gordon's plate to stop halfway down. Isla murmured that she never wanted to come between anyone, but she stayed close enough to Brett for her sleeve to brush his hand. Celeste breathed my name like a warning, as if the problem was my tone and not the affair sitting politely beside the window. Brett finally looked at me, and what I saw was not guilt. It was irritation, the look of a man angry that his private arrangement had become public before he could rename it. "You are making this ugly. Kendra," he said, and I looked at his hand near Isla's sleeve before answering that he had made it ugly, and I had only stopped pretending it was furniture. Then he stood between me and Isla and gave me the sentence that ended our marriage. "Apologize to my mother and to Isla. Or go home and pack your things tonight." I went home before Brett did. Not because I was running, but because I finally understood the house was no place where truth could stand upright. I changed out of the dress Celeste had called elegant, folded it over a chair, and opened the drawer where I kept my passport, social security card, marriage certificate, and the papers nobody notices until life breaks. I did not touch Brett's watch, laptop, cards, or the joint account we used for bills. I packed like a woman leaving a marriage, not like a woman trying to win a scene. By the time Brett came in, the suitcase was open on the bed, and my work laptop was in its sleeve. He paused in the doorway, wearing the shirt Isla had brushed at dinner, and asked if I was done being dramatic. I zipped the side pocket around my charger and told him I was done being managed. His face tightened, because Brett only called a woman dramatic when her pain cost him convenience. I took photos of the messages I already had, the late shifts, the dinner confirmations, the lies that had sat in my phone for weeks. I emailed them to myself, not to post, not to threaten, just to preserve the date before anyone could pretend the timeline was foggy. Then I wrote one sentence in my notes app: "Separation begins tonight." It looked small, but it was the first clean sentence I had written about my marriage. Brett stood there waiting for tears, bargaining, some old version of me to return and smooth the room for him. I told him I would contact a family attorney in the morning, and anything about the house or separation could go through proper channels. He laughed once, but it sounded nervous, and that told me he had noticed I was not asking permission. Before sunrise, I drove out of Sacramento with one suitcase, one laptop, and Marisol Grant's address saved in my phone. Santa Fe did not welcome me with anything dramatic. It was dry air. A borrowed room behind Marisol Grant's house, a dented desk, and mornings where I opened my laptop before the sun reached the windows. Marisol worked long shifts at a breakfast place near Cirillo's Road, and she helped in the only way that did not make me feel pitied. She handed me a key, showed me the grocery store, and said, "Eat something before you answer that man." For the first 2 weeks, I lived by small rules because small rules were easier than feelings. I worked, washed my clothes, answered my attorney's emails, and learned how quiet dinner could be when no one used silence as punishment. Marisol did not ask for the full story, and that made her safer than people who cared while digging for details. One afternoon, she brought home a woman from the museum where she catered staff lunches and introduced her as Sabrina Vale, someone who noticed everything without making a performance of it. Sabrina was 35, calm, neatly tired, with a canvas tote full of folders and a voice that made every sentence feel measured. She came because Marisol had asked if I could glance at a benefits form. Not legal. Just paperwork people pass across kitchen tables when life gets busy. My separation folder sat half open beside my laptop, and when Sabrina saw the name Maddox, her hand stopped on her coffee cup. "Is Brett Maddox related to Gordon Maddox?" she asked. And I felt the air in that room change before I understood why. I told her Gordon was my father-in-law, though the words felt outdated in my mouth. Sabrina looked toward the window, then back at me, and said Gordon had been her stepfather when she was young. She did not sound angry, which made it worse, because anger would have been easier to place than that flatness. Then she opened her tote and pulled out an old photograph. And there was Gordon, standing beside Celeste in a room I recognized from Maddox family albums. Except Sabrina and another woman had never appeared in any version I had been allowed to see. Sabrina did not tell the story like someone asking to be rescued. She spread the photograph beside my separation folder, then pulled out letters with softened corners, vendor notes, and old program drafts from the years before Gordon Maddox became the man people toasted at dinners. Her mother, Lorna Vale, had introduced him to the theater owners, projection suppliers, and art house managers who trusted her before they ever trusted him. Then Celeste entered the picture, and Lorna's work slowly became Gordon's history. The evidence was not dramatic, which made it harder to dismiss. A proposal had Lorna's name in the first draft, then only Gordon's name in the version sent to a cinema group outside Oakland. An email from Celeste described Lorna as difficult with reputation concerns, written to a woman who later stopped returning her calls. Sabrina touched the page once and said, "That phrase followed my mother everywhere." And I believed her because I had heard Celeste turn insult into etiquette across a dinner table. There was no stolen bank account, no hidden inheritance, no clean crime someone could explain in one angry sentence. It was smaller and dirtier than that. Lorna had been made unreliable in rooms where she was not present to answer, and Sabrina had watched her mother shrink under words that sounded too polite to fight. I asked why she never pushed harder, and Sabrina looked at the stack of letters before answering. Women without the right last name learn survival before they learn justice. I sat there with my hands around a coffee mug I had not touched, seeing the shape of the Maddox family in every page. First came the compliment that made you smaller, then the concern that made you unstable, then the silence from people who benefited from not knowing better. A cropped event photo showed Gordon smiling beside Celeste, but the uncropped version had Lorna standing on his other side with a folder pressed to her chest. That missing body in the frame felt less like an accident than a habit. Sabrina slid one final email across the table, and the subject line was ordinary enough to be cruel. Celeste had written that everyone would be more comfortable if Lorna stepped back until things settled. I read it because the wording felt familiar in my bones. The same clean language Brett used when he wanted pain to sound like inconvenience. Then my phone lit up with his name, and Sabrina saw it before I turned the screen over. I let the phone ring twice because Brett Maddox had spent years treating my response like something he owned. Sabrina sat across from me, one hand still resting on Celeste's email, and neither of us had to say the name on my screen had arrived too neatly. When I answered, Brett did not ask if I was safe. He asked, "Who have you been talking to?" I looked at Sabrina, then at the photograph where Gordon stood beside the woman his family had cropped out of history. "I'm sitting with Sabrina Vale," I said, and the silence that followed did not feel like surprise. It felt like recognition, like a locked drawer opening somewhere in Sacramento. Brett finally breathed out and asked, "Why would you say that name? which told me more than any confession could have. I had not explained who Sabrina was, and he had already made her sound forbidden. Pause. 3S. He tried to recover quickly, because men like Brett reach for control when truth enters before they are dressed for it. Kendra, whatever she told you, she is not family, he said, and Sabrina's eyes moved toward the uncropped photo without blinking. I told him it was strange how fast he could make a woman outside the family when she had lived in Gordon's house before Isla ever knew his name. His voice tightened around my name. And then came the sentence I expected from a Maddox man. Do not let old drama pull you into something ugly. I almost smiled because ugly had become their favorite word for anything they could no longer keep quiet. I told Brett the separation would go through attorneys, the house through proper channels, and Sabrina's history belonged to Sabrina, not him. He asked if I planned to hurt his parents, and I answered that I was not planning anything. A few minutes after I hung up, Celeste sent one message, stripped of charm and polished poison, and somehow that frightened me more than her dinner table smiles. Please call me. Isla reached out before Brett did, which told me something had shifted in Sacramento. Her message arrived late. Careful. The way people write when they are trying to sound sorry without admitting what would cost them. Brett told her our marriage had been over for a long time. She wrote, and she never meant to be the reason I left. I read it twice at Marisol's kitchen table, then opened the screenshot Brett had sent her after dinner. He had written that I would calm down once I realized I had nowhere better to go. I sent that line back to Isla with nothing above it and nothing below it, because explanation would have softened what he said plainly. For almost an hour, she did not respond. Then her message came through, smaller than the first one, and all it said was, I thought he chose me. I wanted to hate her cleanly, because clean hatred would have made the whole thing easier. But Isla had sat at that table while Brett ordered me to apologize, and she had looked down instead of standing up. She was not innocent because he lied, and she was not a monster because she believed the version he sold her. She wanted to be chosen so badly that she helped another woman be dismissed. The consequences started without me. A staff complaint at the theater chain triggered a review of Brett's scheduling authority, and records showed convenient late shifts, closing changes, and client bookings routed through Isla when someone else should have handled them. It was not a headline, not a scandal big enough for strangers, just workplace mess that makes managers stop protecting you. Brett was suspended pending review, and Isla was removed from scheduling. She sent one message after that, not asking forgiveness, not asking friendship. She wrote, he said you were cold, and I stared at those 5 words until they stopped hurting and started sounding familiar. Brett had used the same language on both of us, changing only the woman in front of him. I did not answer, because silence was the first thing in this story that belonged to me. Sabrina did not run to the internet, and that mattered. She found a California reporter who wrote about independent theaters and the people who built those places before anyone called them cultural assets. He did not promise her a story over one call. He asked for emails, uncropped photographs, vendor names, and anyone alive who remembered Lorna Vale without needing Gordon Maddox to approve the memory. For 3 weeks, nothing public happened. That was the part people never understand about truth when it is handled carefully. It moves slowly, through returned calls, forwarded archives, invoices, and people saying, yes, I remember her, but I never knew why she disappeared. Sabrina stayed calm, though I saw her hands shake when a retired theater manager confirmed Lorna had introduced Gordon to half his first clients. When the article appeared, it did not read like gossip. It read like a door being opened in a house locked too long. There was Lorna's first proposal with her name still on it. Then the later version with only Gordon's. There was Celeste's email about reputation concerns, and the uncropped event photo where Lorna stood beside Gordon with a folder against her chest. Exactly where the Maddox album had left empty air. Sacramento did not explode. It cooled. A dinner honoring Gordon was postponed, then canceled, and a small museum removed Celeste from a host committee without making a statement. One theater owner told Gordon they needed to review the vendor relationship, and another stopped answering his calls. That was the sound of a reputation changing, not shouting, just doors closing softly from the other side. Brett came to Santa Fe after the article spread through the people who mattered to his parents. We met outside a coffee shop, and he looked older, like a man who had finally slept beside his own choices. "Did you want this?" he asked, and I understood he still wanted someone to blame. I told him I did not want anyone's life to burn down, but I was done standing inside their house holding the water. He looked away when I said that, because he knew exactly which house I meant. Then he asked if I was punishing him, and I told him he was confusing consequences with punishment. His mouth tightened, but he did not argue. Instead, he admitted Celeste had known about Isla longer than I thought, and what scared his mother was never the affair. It was me no longer helping them keep it quiet. The divorce ended without one final scene, which felt more honest than anything Brett and I had survived together. My attorney handled the house. The separation date stayed tied to the night he told me to pack, and whatever we once owned together was divided through paperwork instead of threats. Brett sent one email after everything was signed, not asking to come back, not dressing regret like poetry, just writing, "I should have protected you at that table." I read it once, believed it as much as I could, and let it remain unanswered. Brett lost his management role after the theater chain finished its review, and later I heard he took a smaller job outside Sacramento, where nobody cared about the Maddox name. Isla left too, quietly, without a public collapse, but the kind of industry silence that makes calls stop coming. Months later, Marisol heard she was working at a little arts cinema in another state, and when a coworker was talked down to by her boyfriend in the lobby, Isla told her, "You do not have to smile through that." I hoped she meant it for both of them. Celeste and Gordon did not disappear, because people like that rarely do. They simply became less invited, less quoted, less centered in rooms that once opened before they knocked. Gordon lost vendor relationships he used to call friendships, and Celeste lost the soft power she had mistaken for character. Sabrina got something quieter than a victory, but stronger than pity. Lorna Vale's name restored in archives, old programs, and the mouths of people who finally admitted they remembered her. As for me, I stayed in Santa Fe longer than I planned, then stopped calling it temporary. I took a benefits job with a local arts organization, rented a small apartment near Marisol's place, and learned that peace could sound like a refrigerator humming in a kitchen where nobody was judging my silence. Adrian Cole entered my life slowly, a stage lighting technician with steady hands, a dry sense of humor, and the rare habit of doing exactly what he said he would do. He did not rescue me, and I loved that most. Sometimes I still think about Brett standing in that Sacramento dining room, believing he had given me two choices: apologize or leave. He thought the cruel part was making me pack, but the truth was, packing was the first kind thing that happened to me that night. He pushed me out of a room built to make me smaller, and outside of it, I finally became someone I could live with.